Hey, good morning, folks. This is going to be a painting day. My goal is to get the two unpainted figures for the Gotha Bomber, the commander, Hans Peter, over here on the left, and the pilot, Ernst Udet, over here on the right. Get these guys finished. At least all of the base colors, most of the shading, maybe do the touch-up tomorrow. So I'm going to get started on this, and for once I've gotten relatively organized on the workbench. Everything neat and tidy, at least for the next 15 or 20 minutes when I really get going. So as you can see, I don't have modern custom base holders, miniature holders. I just improvise to make my own with blue tack, very important, toothpicks, toothpick holder, rotary disc holder container. Those work just fine, especially for very, very small miniatures. When you spend big bucks on other parts of the hobby, and I don't want to go into where I've made some of my more egregious mistakes in overspending, well, you've got to economize somewhere. And not buying clamps or customized bases from Citadel, Army Painter, anybody else is one way to go. Speaking of Army Painter, I have been using this lovely little travel wet palette kit for quite a while now. It looks almost new because that's from time to time I spray the top of it black primer just to clean it up and let that dry. And I decided since it was going to be featured a little bit in my video, it was time for another coat of black primer, which is now dry. This is not a big wet palette. But that's probably a good thing given how messy I get and how many paints I slop on, but it serves the needs. And it's compact, which is good given the relatively small size of my table or workbench. So I've got the paints now that and shades I pretty much know I'll be using most, if not all of these, and maybe some more. But these are sort of my go-to for Great War pilots, and I've got them arrayed here, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about what the shades are. I've got a combination of stuff from Army Painters, Scale Color 75, or Scale 75. There's another Army Painter, AK Interactive, and of course, Vallejo. And I already know that I will be using almost all of these and maybe some more, and be getting going on that. The brushes are here. That's pretty much my collection of acrylic as well as some synthetic brushes that I use for painting. The dry brushes are in a different tumbler or container. Important not to mix up your water container for wetting the brush and cleaning off paint with the other one, which is for drinking, not water. There's a bit of coffee left. This is something that I really need to pay attention to. Probably the mug should be in red or neon, but it seems to do the purpose, and I haven't been dipping the paintbrush in my coffee since I got this mug for Christmas. Okay, enough of the intro. I'll be back at various stages of the day with additional updates since I can't video and paint at the same time. I have neither the skill nor the equipment for it in that order. So I'm going to take a break now and see if I can get the faces, the skin tones painted, and then we'll do a short update and go from there. Okay, so I laid down a couple of coats, very thin coats of base skin color for each of the two figures. I used Vallejo Brown Rose for Hans Peter, and I used Vallejo Salmon Rose for Ernst Udet. So let's take a look at how they turned out. All right, let's see if I can get. There is Hans Peter. About 2 or 3 very thin layers of brown rose. It's quite easy to overwhelm these little figures with too thick of paint, so I try, not always successfully, to keep it thin, do a couple of coats rather than one thick coat. Of course, if I were really rigorous about this, I would airbrush on the primer, but I use a rattle can. So the primer is already a little thicker than probably the ideal because of that mode of delivery, but that's the way I go. I just don't like using primer of any sort in my airbrushes, and I've got several, but haven't had good experience with it despite using a variety. So I stick with Army Painter Black and then Zenithal Prime with Tamiya Fine Gray, Fine Surface Gray, or Fine Surface White for the Zenithal priming. All right, so now here is, let's see. Okay, there's Ernst with the lighter, pinker salmon rose. This is all natural light. It's an overcast day. I've got a western exposure. It's in the morning. I like painting with this rather than artificial light. I don't like painting faces at all in the evening under yellow light, or I don't have fancy bulbs for my desk lamps, so I try and do it in daylight. I avoid painting in direct sunlight. Just too bright washes out everything for my eyesight. I probably could put another very thin coat on of the salmon rose for Ernst, and I might do that before proceeding to the next step. He's got gloves on, so I just got the facial area there. Let's see, can I get him in? There, trying very hard. All right. Looks a little washed out in the light, but the coverage is better than it appears. Yeah, just trust me on that one. For Hans Peter, he doesn't have his gloves on, so I had the advantage of being able to try out the thickness of the paint, the viscosity on the hands first before proceeding to the face. By the way, I'm using here where is it? Oh, I'll have to put it down. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm using a very small brush for these faces. It's a Rosemary & Co. Sable brush 2/0, which really means nothing because sizing of brush points, tips differs manufacturer to manufacturer. Usually I use something quite a bit larger than this for better flow, maybe 2 or 3 times this size, but that's with my 1/32 scale figures. For the small size here, at least for the faces and detail work, I'm going with this very small brush. The sable bristles are really good, high quality, so I'm getting a decent flow even though it's really tiny. All right, next step now will be to fill in the eye sockets, which I'm going to do with this clear doped linen, which is actually designed for the underside of Great War airplanes, British airplanes. But I find it works well for the eye sockets because it's thin, it's not white, which you don't want to use, and it's easy to clean up and then paint over without creating a lot of bulk in the eye area. So I'll be doing that. I will also be mixing the Vallejo light flesh with both the salmon rose for Ernst and the brown rose for Hans Peter to create the highlight areas. I don't go straight from the base color here and here to this light highlight flesh. I mix to get a blend so it's not too stark, and then I get a different shade of highlight. So I'm going to put in the eyes, the eye socket for what will eventually become the quote, whites, unquote, of the eyes. and then put in the highlights around forehead, bridge of the nose, chin if it's exposed, cheekbone area, upper cheekbone, cheek area. And that will be next with these paints. Okay, here is the commander of the Gotha Bomber. I'm calling him Hans Peter, and I have finished doing the skin tones, face, hands. I wish I could get the light adjusted better. That's natural light coming in from outside. I've got the shade almost down, and it's washing out the pretty pale blue irises that this guy has, but maybe I'll be able to get that in a still photo at the end. Obviously, still have to paint the uniform, helmet, but all the hard stuff is done now. I may be only kidding a little bit, but my feeling is with miniature figures, at least humans, not necessarily fantasy figures, that if you get the face right, the clothing is sort of a sideshow, especially for historical figures. That probably wouldn't be the case for pre-20th century, where the uniforms were very bright and gaudy, but that's the way I approach it. If you get the face right, and most importantly within the face, the eyes, the rest of it can be so-so. Not that I want it to be so-so, mind you. On the other hand, if you do a spectacular uniform, but the face looks like Phantom of the Opera with the acid thrown in its face, well, not so successful. I will still do a little bit of touch-up around the mouth and lips with, now that I'm looking at it a little closer with a bit of zoom on my iPhone, but we'll take care of that when I paint the overcoat or winter jacket and clothing, uniform, etc. Probably tomorrow. Well, I also finished, this is Ernst Udet, of course, and again, you're just going to have to trust me that he looks a little better to the real eye than he does on my camera. The light is sort of overwhelming, putting some reflection back, even though I've put a flat matte varnish on the face. He's also got pale blue eyes, but I guess I've got him positioned a little differently. So I'm very happy how he turned out. And again, I will paint the uniforms, their outerwear, probably tomorrow. And then I will have the crew finished. I don't think I'm going to need to do any touch-up for Ernst here. A little bit more for Hans Peter. Paints I used, just as a review, the base skin tones were brown. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah, there we go. We're brown rose for Hans Peter and salmon rose for Ernst. Then I used this light flesh as a highlight color mixed with the other two for each figure respectively. I used this clear doped linen for the whites of the eyes, and brought that then and then cut that back down with the skin tones around the edges. Just tiny little specks of blue, electric blue for the irises. Mahogany for the eyebrows. I really like the consistency of this paint for eyebrows. I also use it for leather jackets, Model Air Mahogany. It's almost like a speed paint, but it's just got the right consistency when you're trying to etch or sketch a little eyebrow line across a small face, especially a 1/48 scale face. Flesh wash I only used on the hands to provide definition around the fingers and across the lips. Now, on many 1/48 figures that aren't necessarily well sculpted, I'll basically slap flesh wash on after I've done the highlights and shadows and allow that to fill in the eye socket and other details. But for something that's well-sculpted resin figures, the flesh wash I use much more sparingly. This is my go-to, this black cheekbone, reddish black cheekbone glaze from AK. And I use that across the sides and the jawline to provide some contrast. Again, it looks pretty good. I use that on almost all of my military figures. So those were the paints for the skin tones. And just close and see if I can bring these guys back together. Probably my silly camera won't be able to focus. That would be just too much on both of them at the same time. Can try. Yeah, I'm going to try some photos, see if I can get some successful photos that show these off a little bit better. Pre-painting the uniforms, they'll be at the end. If not, well, I'm going to blame the light and my camera. Pretty happy with how the painting session went today. Thanks for watching.